Where Module 4 was very technical in detail, Module 5 about the net environmental benefit analysis, it's a little bit more cerebral. Module 5 examines the complex relationship between striving for a net environmental benefit that is not creating more harm from operations than the pollution itself, while still trying to achieve reasonable costs from the mitigation measures undertaken. These are government incident management policies the environmental unit works according to. However, by trying to stay to those policies, you can incur unmitigated and residual environmental impacts that may have to be redressed through restoration or other forms of compensation efforts. The environmental unit's mission revolves around application of net environmental benefit analysis, known by the acronym NEBA, that guides in making decisions about the options available for impact mitigation, such as response measures, so that the environmental and socioeconomic impacts are kept to a minimum. Achieving the correct and agreed on balance to meet all agency responsible party representative interests in the best practical manner, and then weighing and comparing tactical response options with the advantages and disadvantages of natural recovery, that is, not doing anything. Within the context of net environmental benefit analysis, response to marine incidents strives for two objectives. First, to minimize the severity of the environmental damage, and second, to enhance the recovery of damaged ecosystems. The definition of net environmental benefit analysis is quite complicated. Bear with me. Net environmental benefit analysis is a qualitative comparative analysis that aims to decrease the overall harm of marine incident from its spill, wreckage, and/or debris on ecological, cultural, and commercial resources and their value, whilst achieving agreed-on acceptable mitigation measures, and secondly, ensuring overall positive results and benefits. In undertaking NEBA's processes, as according to its definition, its tenets are that it's perceived as transparent and equitable by the response community, provided collaboratively and inclusively with coastal users, agencies, and the responsible party, that is based on science, experience, and local knowledge, it's delivered in a structured and timely way, undertaken by qualified and representative people, viewed as pragmatic, proven, and reasonable. These are a lot that need to be covered. We'll explore this a little bit more. The environmental unit involves key players within the emergency response community with different reasons and perspectives for being engaged. Let's take a look at this response community. First of all, there's the coastal community. These could be First Nations and other people that reside within the impact area of a marine incident. They seek emotional wholeness. They want the world back to where it was before the incident happened. Then there are the agencies. They like to see things being done in a legal way as well as scientifically approach to the mitigation measures undertaken. Lastly, there is the responsible party. They're paying the bills. They want things to be practical and cost effective. During the management of a marine incident, there can be many different interests that may arise that the environmental unit will have to address and resolve. For example, they have to understand what the local population is comprised of. It may be a rural area with a high First Nations population, or a urban area which has industrial activities around it. There are sensitive species to be considered, like species at risk. There are ecological sensitive areas, like clam habitats or important bird areas. Local and community interests need to be addressed, such as marinas, aquaculture facilities, tourist lodges. Then there are cultural and historical considerations that need to be protected during operations, such as middens, fish weirs, clam gardens. There are ecological activities that may be postponed during this incident, such as sports fishing and ecotourism, such as kayaking. There also could have been critical infrastructures involved, such as an important port or harbor. All these have seasonal variabilities. So the environmental unit has to understand that it is an interactive process to seek consensus and credibility of all these interests that may be involved. Though the environmental unit has to address the net environmental assessment drivers and interests during a marine incident, there are three activities that could help. These could be considered as collecting, predicting, and comparing. Let's look at collecting. Collecting is information about the incident, the ecology, and human uses. An example of that would be undertaking field observations by aerial aircraft or undertaking shoreline cleanup assessments of oiled shores. Then one takes that information and undertakes the process of predicting based on previous case studies, experience, the likely environment and social impact. This is where science and experience comes in handy. Then you take that information and you undertake comparing the advantages and disadvantages of the response officers, including natural recovery. All this information is used to make recommendations to command of what mitigation measures would be taken, if any at all. Here's a short video on the net environmental benefit overview regarding preparing for it and applying it.
Net Environmental Benefit Analysis, or NEBA, is a process used by the response community for making the best choices to minimize impacts of oil spills on people and the environment. Before a spill occurs, NEBA requires the identification and prioritization of environmental and community assets based upon environmental sensitivities and social values. Outcomes are predicted by reviewing and comparing previous spill cases, including restoration considerations, to understand potential impacts. During the NEBA process, environmental and social impacts are weighed to determine effective oil spill response tools and balance trade-offs. NEBA also establishes plans and puts pre-approvals in place to support environmental and social values. NEBA, or the Net Environmental Benefit Analysis, allows proactive pre-selection and planning to inform a response. This improves organization, communication with the community, and plays a critical role in protecting the environment.
Let's go through a few examples of the net environmental benefit analysis situations that the environmental unit may have to deal with. Let's look at in-situ oil burning, also referred to as alternative response measures or non-mechanical response measures. Burning oil in situ, referred to in place on water by fire booms or on shore, such as oily woody debris and marshlands, is an example where one would want to look if there's a net environmental benefit for doing this. Removal of fresh oil and oil materials by burning can be highly effective, but results in localized air quality impacts. A consideration is not exposing communities and public to harmful levels and duration of smoke particulates. So this requires some plume analysis and understanding where this contaminants will go. It's very situation specific. Dispersants are another alternative response measure. They are chemical agents that are spread either by plane or by boat that break up an oil slick into small droplets, which dilute throughout the water column. Small oil particles are more easily biodegradable. Promoting natural recovery with dispersants offsets having oil stranded on shores needing cleanup. A consideration for using dispersant is that it does not immediately remove oil and it creates a chemical oil pathway, and therefore other ecological exposures and impact uncertainty. It's a tough call to determine whether or not one wants to use dispersants or not. For oil that has stranded on shore, there are other chemical agents that can be used. They're referred to as spill treatment agents or STAs. One of them is shore washing agent and the other is a bioremediation agent. Shore washing agent augments ambient water flushing deluge of stranded, weathered heavy oil by reducing its viscosity, whereas bioremediation agencies promote natural biological degradation of oiled shore by adding nutrients that increase bacterial activity. Using a shore washing agent helps remove stranded, weathered oil, such as a residue bunker C or a crude dilbit, when ambient flushing is no longer effective. The option is to leave the oil for manual cleanup or undertake no further treatment. A consideration when using a shore washing agent is creating a chemical oil pathway and therefore other exposures impact uncertainty. The decanting of recovered oily water during on-water oil recovery activities does not require chemicals. Decanting oily water mixture collected from a skimming vessel is used to free up onboard storage. Water and oil is allowed to separate. Then the water is removed, referred to as decanted, leaving concentrated oil in storage. The decanted water is directed back in front of the skimmer within the surface slick. Oily water separation and decanting, cleaning water of the sea during skimming vessel operations is a standard operating procedure, but needs agency approval, as the decanted water will still have some concentrations of oil. As such, the environmental unit is part of making this recommendation and providing conditions around a permit to allow decanting. Net environmental benefit analysis plays a very large and important role in the management of oiled shores, whether to undertake treatments or leave for natural recovery. Undertaking oil shore treatments or cleanup is part of a shoreline cleanup assessment technique known as by its acronym SCAT or SCAT. The consideration for each oil shore and its treatment, if any, is balancing net environmental benefit with reasonable cost, yet meeting agency, First Nations, public expectations. This is done with each oiled shoreline segment. The net environmental benefit analysis process can be used to determine a place of refuge or another course of action for a vessel needing assistance. There is a potential for the threat or impact of a major ship grounding or breaking apart and needing assistance. There may be urgent need to find a place of refuge such as sheltered cove, bay, or harbor to stabilize the situation or to pursue another course of action such as repair in place, send further offshore, or intentionally beach it. The decision to allow a place of refuge or the determination of its fate is a critical strategic response action. The outcome can markedly affect public community well-being, the environment, and the cost of response. There are numerous factors that need to be taken into account, assessed, and balanced. This may be done during the initial response of a marine incident. As such, if the incident command system is invoked, the environmental unit may be established in a virtual setting and not within a command post, but through conference calls and other forms of communications. There are net environmental benefit analysis aspects within the management and treatment of harmed wildlife. There's a very high expectation that any oiled or other harmed wildlife are fully looked after. However, decisions have to be made which Let's look at some of the fundamental considerations for each response measure that an NEBA needs to consider, using oiled shoreline treatment as an example. First, knowing what to do. What are your response options? Is it natural recovery? Leave it alone? Do you undertake manual removal of pollution by rakes and shovels, or are you going to use chemical agents? This is determined on a shore-by-shore basis. Within the shore that's being assessed, what not to do. This is telling operations what their constraints will be. Do not work in any ecological or cultural sensitive areas. Do not use heavy equipment. Do not use heated water. This ensures that the operational activities do not cause more impact than the oil itself. Defining when work will be completed. What are your endpoints? There are certainly measurable criteria, such as cease shoreline water flushing. Once you no longer see brown or black oil floating to the surface. Cease treatment once you reach the oil coat on rocks. Then finally you have to agree on when work is completed, the sign off for each shoreline that has been oiled. Agreements have to be made with the response party, by agencies, First Nations, and as stewards of the shore that no further response is required, and you move on to the next shore to be treated. Let's explore the net environmental benefit analysis factors that need consideration. For example, to achieve a net environmental benefit, there often is trade-offs for oil shoreline treatments. As one moves towards more stringent response measures like higher expectations, the more issues and challenges and trade-offs result. Here are examples of endpoints where no further treatment would be required. You could have thick oil left on the shore. You could have just an oil coat, something that you could scrape off with your finger, or oil stain, which is a much thinner coat of oil on a rock that you can't scrape off. You might just leave an oil sheen on the rock, or you may want to have no visible oil at all. So the factors you have to consider is that as you go up to these higher expectations and more stringent criteria, it increases the cost. You can incur additional environmental damage. Could be reliance on more analytical measurements to get to determine if no oil is present. There's reduced operational flexibility, and there can be conflicts of expectations. This is the technical and institutional dynamics that one will incur in working in the environmental unit to address these trade-offs. This is one of the most complex slides for this course to explain the relationship of the net environmental benefit analysis and the recovery rule. I'm going to use some Environmental Economics 101 to explain it. Why is this important to the environmental unit? Well, two cornerstones of industry and government that guides NEBA are that there's no further harm is done by mitigation measures, there's a net environmental benefit achieved, and second, mitigation measures are of reasonable cost insofar as being efficient, effective, proven, and pragmatic. That is, essentially, impact mitigation needs to be as low as reasonably practicable, known by the acronym ALARP, to reduce ecological impacts as well as response costs. Let's take a look at the graph to the right. It's beginning with mitigation efficiency to reduce, showing that it's reduced with response effort, the blue line. When oil is first on water and you're recovering by on-water recovery vessels, the mitigation efficiency is high. You are gathering a lot of oil for a little bit of effort. As that oil becomes stranded on shore, the efficiency and the amount of return for effort is reduced, such as trying to remove oil with ambient water flushing to recover oil. As you go further and try to clean up shorelines and get involved in manual cleanup, and then head into doing steam cleaning to get that last little bit of oil, the amount of removal of oil for effort markedly becomes lower. Now looking at the red line, and the environmental damage is increases with treatment effort. At the beginning, when gathering any kind of mobile oil on water, there's often very little environmental damage. As one moves to the shoreline and stranded oil, ambient water flushing dilution is actually quite a gentle way to remove oil, but there is still some impact. But as one gets towards doing mechanical removal, using heated water, the environmental damage is markedly increases. So what is the optimum level? Well, the optimal level is where the mitigation efficiency and the damage sort of meet. This is sort of where it's referred to as a reasonable cost. So let's interpret this graph a little bit further. Under the red line to the left is really the amount of mitigation that's being achieved for China to meet the guiding policy of no further harm and that there's reasonable costs. However, on the right-hand side of the line, under the blue line, that is the residual environmental damage for abiding by and complying to these guidelines. So striving for the recovery rule can lead to unmitigated residual ecological impacts that require some compensation to redress the lost goods and services. This is something that the environmental unit must keep in mind at all times. Application of ALARP, or the recovery rule, in the net environmental benefit analysis defines best management practice for impact mitigation, such as how to remove, treat, or clean pollution, wreckage, or other debris from a marine incident. Decisions also include doing nothing. These principles aid in natural recovery, but there can still be residual unmitigated ecological impacts afterwards, as shown by the graph. Application of ALRP and NEBA is not about restoring the natural resource damages. Restoration is an aspect of post-incident impact monitoring and assessment studies. Nevertheless, the work by the environmental unit in gathering field data and recording the observations play an important role in future restoration efforts. Canada does not have a natural resource damage assessment program that is inclusive of specialized damage assessment teams, ecological evaluations for monetary compensation determination, trustee committees to guide and oversee program delivery, and other well-established procedures, such as in the United States. Natural resource damage assessment, known by the acronym NRDA or NARDA, is a process designed to make the public and communities whole for injury to them for permanent or temporary loss or reduction of their natural resources and the service they depended on or cherished, such as cultural, commercial, or ecological. Essentially, NARDA is undertaken as a matter of equity to redress, compensate for residual impacts after applying the recovery rule during a marine incident. There are skills and experiences that members of the environmental unit need to effectively apply the net environmental benefit analysis. One needs to be conversant, skilled, and experienced in understanding the fate and effect of different pollution types, whether it be oil, hazardous substances, and within different receiving environments, such as on shores, within different sea conditions, and under wave exposures. Also having to know how to use coastal resource inventory and sensory maps, knowing response options and their secondary impacts from operations, engaging First Nations and other community members for local knowledge and interest, and then having to meet government agencies and First Nations mandates, rights, and titles, and knowing how this is done. This requires that there is a diversity of members in the environmental unit to meet all these requirements. It's important for the environmental unit members to understand natural recovery of impacted coastal marine environments. Natural processes, such as evaporation and biodegradation of spilled oil, are the benchmarks to compare environmental impacts and cleanup treatment options. It's important not to create work when you don't have to, and that natural recovery will actually do a good job and will not result in secondary impacts. Let's explore this a little bit further. Let's look at natural recovery as part of the environmental unit's mission when making recommendations on shoreline cleanup. Let's look at a case studies. The first one being the Sealandang IU incident in the winter off of Unalaska Island in the Aleutian Chain of Alaska. This vessel broke apart, spilling much of its bunker oil that stranded on shores. The middle picture shows a heavily oiled, cobbled, pebbled beach within a high wave exposure environment. No treatment was undertaken, as you can see from the picture on the right, that it's clean. The actual wave action and broke up the oil and natural cleaning occurred, and there was no operational work done on this beach at all. Let's look at the next natural recovery case study, which occurred in Canada. The cargo vessel Westwood Annette spilled its bunker fuel on August 2006 within the Squamish River estuary, which is located in the Howe Sound, British Columbia. The oil heavily contaminated marsh grass, but this marsh grass was left untreated. The reason why was there was heavy levels of glacial silt in the tidal waters that naturally stripped the oil off the grass. As you can see from the middle picture, it was heavily oiled. But a year later, you could see that the grass is healthy. There is no treatment. The main impact was actually from workers that were undertaking cleanup on the marshlands, and that they trampled and harmed the roots of the grass and caused a significant amount of damage as a result. The third case study about natural recovery is back in Alaska. We go back to the Exxon Valdez crude oil spill in 1989 in Prince William Sound. What's important here is that there was a study called the Mears Rock, and which was not cleaned or treated after the spill, and there was a time sequence to show the natural variation that occurred over the course of 15 months, as shown by this slide sequence. The importance of this study is that there's often a desire to get the environment that's been harmed back to its original state. That's difficult to achieve when there's this much natural variation within 1 year after another. This is something that the environmental unit needs to keep in mind over the long run, especially when we start to pursue restoration after an incident, that there are such high levels of natural variation in temperate water coastal ecologies. Let's summarize the net environmental benefit analysis as undertaken by the environmental unit. The environmental unit maximizes and promotes natural recovery while considering extent, duration, and types of environmental impacts, likelihood of mitigation measures by operations to cause greater harm than the pollution itself, looking at opportunities to use natural processes to hasten recovery that includes no treatment. We must remember that when the environmental unit is applying the recovery rule and is striving for a net environmental benefit, it could lead to unmitigated impacts to coastal ecologies. The environmental unit's work can help set the foundation for restoration programs, as well as the natural resource damage assessments, if pursued. Let's take a look at Spill Impact Mitigation Assessment, otherwise known by the acronym SIMA. It's essentially the updating of the net environmental benefit analysis paradigm, but with a more structured and transparent process. Spill Impact Mitigation Assessment is net environmental benefit analysis with embellishments. It's not a replacement in principle. Spill Impact Mitigation Assessment recognizes that the selection of the most appropriate response options typically involves considering various factors and trade-offs, which can be complicated and overwhelming. It was around 2017 that the international oil and gas industry introduced Spill Impact Mitigation Assessment and introduced some guidelines on implementing it. The drivers for developing Spill Impact Mitigation Assessment by the oil and gas industry, based on examples used to explain it, are alternative response measures, such as in-situ oil burning and dispersants. The goal is that other stakeholders, such as government agencies, will adopt a similar approach to institutionalize spill impact mitigation assessment processes and procedures. The stages, the inputs of spill impact mitigation assessment are the same as net environmental benefit analysis in both process and in principles. Spill impact mitigation assessment is just a bit more detailed, structured, and transparent. Given the broad range and scale of oil spill planning scenarios, diverse perceptions of the value of ecological, social, economic, and cultural sensitivities, and the innate realities of oil spill response field operations, no single Spill Impact Mitigation Assessment methodology is suitable or indeed appropriate for applications for all situations. In essence, Spill Impact Mitigation Assessment methodologies are quite organic and need to be adapted to what you're trying to achieve. The process is mostly applicable to response planning. An example is advanced planning for places of refuge for vessels needing assistance. On selecting potential places of refuge, considerations would include the size of the vessels, the type of vessels, and the type of pollution that might be resulting, such as an oil spill or a loss in containers or a fire aboard the vessel. Another is area concerns identified by coastal communities such as First Nation on where to focus on-water response efforts and nearshore protection such as geographic response strategies, which are booming tactics. A third example is pre-shoreline claim assessment techniques known as Pre-SCAT, which is a program to assess shores prior to a spill for its vulnerability, sensitivity, treatments, and operational constraints and endpoints. To the left shows options based on scenarios, detailed analysis and consultations with ranking criteria. This is when Spill Impact Mitigation Assessment is used during the contingency planning process. It provides an unhurried, consensus-based approach, incorporating dialogue with relevant stakeholders. When conducted during planning, it not only develops the most effective response strategy for each scenario, such as shown in the slide before, it also helps to determine the subsequent provision of suitable response equipment and supporting logistics. The goal of the process is to bring transparency and credibility by documenting and demonstrating how potential response options have been analyzed and incorporated into each strategy. To the right, for more geographically confined areas like a shore being undertaken for shoreline claim assessment techniques during a spill response, it's more of an intuitive decision based on experience, local knowledge, and science, rather than detailed analysis using spreadsheets developed in a workshop environment. The application and acceptance of spill impact mitigation analysis has its challenges. It may still require a social license based on trust behind the science for applying, say, alternative response measures, such as dispersants and in-situ burning. It may require supporting analysis tools to support the feasibility of options, such as the response gap analysis process on when and where spill response equipment, such as booms, skimmers, and vessels, can be effectively and safely used in a region and seasonally. It requires user and recipient training and delivery, facilitated by a trusted, neutral, and experienced provider. It needs to address the logistical capability and capacity behind each response option. The process relies on ranking what is the best option and then weighting which are the most critical ones of the response solutions strategies. The final decisions are based on a collective consensus-based process once all parties have a common operational picture. Regardless of the structure, it still ends up being an intuitive process that is hopefully pragmatic, fair, and transparent.